Okay, so let's see. In the last video, we talked about the crisis of attention. And so this was kind of a topic that was supposed to kind of just bring light to the overall issue. The idea that attention, A, is important, and B, it's in crisis, And what that means is attention is being scattered, it's being, you know, I guess commodified is the word, but it's being influenced. In some sense, it's being controlled. Attention is being controlled by the entities at large, right? So the crisis is that, at least in America, we don't get a lot of information on attention or sustaining attention into sustained focus. These are things that just we don't talk about. We don't really, there's no classes going through school about how to improve focus, how to improve attention. It's something that's in our language. We're always talking about paying attention, give me your attention, may I have your attention? And it sounds like it's this exchange, the way that we talk about it. But what happens is when attention isn't being guided purposefully, then that exchange is a little bit helter-skelter. It's all over the place. And it's not an authentic exchange. It's not a true exchange because the attention is the topic for today, it is fragmented. So we'll talk about fragmented attention today and then how that fits into the idea of attention being in crisis. And then of course eventually we start to get into what this practice is and how this practice can help address these things. But if we're watching these videos, then we're still defining what's going on. I think that's important. We have to define, well, as my grandpa would say, what is the need that you're filling? Right? We talked about that in the last video. So the need that we're filling is the need for attention training, the need for sustained focus. And today we'll talk a little bit more about why that's important. Okay, so internet so far so good. We got that done. Sharing is not turned on. So as soon as my sharing is turned on, then I'll share my screen and I can show you a little bit of the slideshow. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm not going to put this into slideshow. I'm just going to share it from the PowerPoint. Because A, I don't care, and then B, if it's shared, it slows the computer down. And that seems to kind of mess with stuff. So let's just keep it cohesive. So today we're talking about the fragmentation, not just of attention, but the fragmented self. Okay. So now we're getting into kind of something just a little bit different, still the same kernel, the same main idea, but then how that manifests is just a little bit different in terms of what we're talking about today. So I guess in one sense, we just kind of need to have a little bit of a working definition of what the self is. So, if we take away the ghost in the machine idea, which I'm not taking it away because it doesn't exist, I'm just saying that I'm taking it away just for the sake of definition, that if we define the self, well, what is there? What is it? What is the self? Well, it's our likes, our dislikes, our memories, our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations, our character, our actions, I would say is a big part of the self. And so all of these different elements are kind of put into an umbrella term that we call the self. An interesting little tidbit. I never met the person. It was just so, who knows? Maybe the story isn't completely true because that's the way stories go. But I was told that there was a gentleman who was a Jehovah's Witness, and he was in a car accident. And in that car accident, I think the other people in the car unfortunately didn't make it, but he did. He did, however, suffer severe brain trauma, and he lost almost all of his long-term memory. Obviously, he still had working memory. He could still do things. He still had his skills that he had learned over time, his knowledge that he had learned over time, but his specific memories of his life were gone. And he was no longer a Jehovah's Witness after that because his entire personality changed. So that was kind of an example of how a person's memory affects their sense of self. It affects who they are. Because if you took all of your memories away, you just took a huge chunk of what we would consider the self away, right? So maybe some of the things that you do or don't do are influenced by the life that you've lived so far. Maybe you've learned that you should look both ways before crossing the street. And maybe that lesson hit you the hard way. Maybe not literally. Maybe you saw somebody else that didn't look both ways and it was a near miss. And you're like, oh, well, I learned that lesson. I'm going to make sure from now on, I'm going to look both ways before I cross the street. And then all of a sudden, that memory is wiped away. Well, so is that lesson. And that's just one micro example that if we didn't have our memory, well, the self would definitely change, or how we define the self, or the aspects of the self would certainly be different. So what we're talking about today is kind of the formulation of that. So where our attention goes and the degree that our attention is focused and placed is also the degree to which our memories will be formed and how solid they will be formed. And as I was talking to Shayna yesterday, when we look back on an event, we're not actually looking back at the event. We're looking back at the last time we remembered it, and then the last time we remembered it, and then the last time we remembered it. And when that happens, of course, sometimes we tend to lose little bits of it because we're just remembering the memory and then remembering the memory of that memory and so on. But we're not really stretching back to the original event that was originally placed in our mind because the brain doesn't actually work that way. So hopefully that makes sense. So how does this affect our personality? How does this affect ourself? How does attention have anything to do with a person's identity? Well, let's talk about that. So some of the slides, identity follows sustained attention, distraction prevents meaning. Let's focus on that a little bit. So focus creates memory and self. Now, if you think back to one of your richest memories, again, you're just thinking back to the last time you remembered it, the memory of the memory of the memory. But if you think back to a memory that just has a lot of feeling to it, chances are you're not going to be able to think about what you were verbally, if you had a monologue going in your mind, you're probably not going to remember what you were thinking. You remember the feeling, you remember some of the images. So I think just for the sake of example, one that comes up is, the Great Christmas of 1986. I think it was 86 or 85. I can't remember because I was like 5 or 6. But it was a really great Christmas, and I remember the feeling of it. Like I can look back, I see a couple images in my mind. They're not super sharp anymore because I'm 46, so that was a long time ago. But I can still kind of remember the feeling of that Christmas day. And I don't remember all of the different areas that my attention was focused on. I don't remember the words that were going through my mind. Those things just didn't take, it didn't implant. And that's kind of what we're getting to with this. So let's say you have a big event coming up, something that's really important. You've been working really hard for it. It's been years and years in the making, and you really want to savor it. How do we savor a moment so that the memory of it is more pristine? That we can recall it better, that the feeling of the event is something that we can recall better. Well, attention. Where is our attention? Is our attention fragmented and in a million different places? Or is our attention more focused? Because this memory of this event is going to have a lot to do with our sense of self. It gets added to the motif, I guess you could say, of who we think we are, the self. I put that in air quotes, the self. So when our attention is split, of course, it weakens the depth of our presence. And therefore, when attention is fragmented, it weakens our sense of self and our ability to create new, cohesive, emotionally rich memories. So when our attention is fragmented, our ability to forge and add to the sense of self is severely diminished, as opposed to the moments where you're totally there, totally locked in. This happens a lot when you go on vacation. When you go on vacation, the mind is like, oh, everything is new. And you're looking at this and you're looking at that. And while your attention may be rapidly shifting from one thing to another, it's not as fragmented, right? It's not as dispersed. It's still more focused, even though it is shifting from, oh, look at that mountain. Oh, look at that store. Oh, look at that valley or whatever it is, because you're in a vacation area. So you're doing your vacation and you're seeing all this stuff. And there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of feeling going on with that event. Well, if you were worrying about something, if you were distracted by something, if you're thinking about work and your attention is on things that weren't going well for you the other day, and you're distracted and you're bored. Maybe kids sometimes when they're going on vacation, they're not as locked in as well. I guess that just depends on the kids, because if we were going into a mountain area as a kid, I'm locked in. Like that's where I want to be. That's what I want to see. But maybe some kids don't. Maybe uh, they got a gaming tournament or something and they really just didn't want to go camping this weekend or whatever. And their attention is fragmented. It's on the past, it's on an imaginary future, and attention is kind of like a what am I thinking of? It's kind of like a kaleidoscope. When you look into a kaleidoscope, you see all the different fragmented colors and everything. It's not cohesive. At least in this kaleidoscope, it's not making uh, like a mandala or an organized geometrical pattern. It's just kind of all over the place. And that affects our ability to put memories together. It affects our ability to put feeling and emotion to the memory. And it will affect the richness and the vibrancy of the memory. The more our attention and our focus is locked in, then the more that we're going to be able to see the details when we look back on the memory. And of course, we know this scientifically because we have something that we call state memory. So if a person is in like a traumatic event, their body is going to go into a different state of being and it's going to create memories there. So it's a similar thing. And then so it's creating memories in the state of being of panic and fear. And then when they're no longer in that, they're like, oh, I can't remember a detail. Like I was right there. I tried to remember the license plate number, but it's gone. And then, of course, there's those type of therapy sessions where they try to recreate the emotional energy so that the memory can be recreated. But that, in my opinion, can be a little bit abrasive, to say the least. But this is still lending to the same idea. Where we put our attention, the quality of our attention affects the quality of our experiences, affects the quality of that memory, and that memory gets added to the whole or the totality that we call self. The more we're fragmented, the less our attention is actually present, everything is actually becoming quite vague. And that vagueness becomes a part of the self. It still gets included into that tapestry, even though that might not be what we want.